Welcome to our Azure Incident Retrospective. I'm David Steele.
I'm Sami Kuba. We work in the Azure Communications team.
In addition to providing a written post-incident review after major outages, we also now host these retrospective conversations.
You're about to watch a recording of a live stream where we invited impacted customers through Azure Service Health to join our panel of experts in a live Q&A.
We had a conversation about reliability as a shared responsibility, so this includes our learnings at Microsoft, as well as guidance for customers and partners to be more resilient.
We hope you enjoy the conversation that follows.
Great. So for today's focus incident, we're going to be talking about an Azure Resource Manager incident that impacted our Azure US Government cloud. This ARM issue impacted customers who were attempting any kinds of control plane operations. So that's creating, updating, deleting resources, which may have failed during this incident. That's why we're here to talk about it.
Absolutely. It was on the 27th of September. And while it was just under 2 hours long, the control plane operations impacted all of the regions in our government cloud. This means that customers weren't able to do anything, but it was across multiple regions. We know multiple region outages are very painful for our customers.
Right, so to help us talk through this incident and understand what we learned from it, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First up, we have Brendan Burns, our Corporate Vice President of Azure Cloud Native and Resource Management. Welcome, Brendan.
Super, and also we have Mark Reiner, our Partner Group Software Engineering Manager from the Azure Resource Manager team as well. Brendan, can I start with you? In the PIR, we mentioned that a trigger event for this incident was related to our Secure Futures initiative. Can you help us understand what this is and why security is so important to us and how ARM plays a role in that?
Sure. I mean, security is a critical aspect of maintaining the integrity of our customers' data and the integrity of our services in a world, frankly, where attacks are happening on a daily basis. So, as part of the Secure Futures initiative, we're taking a variety of steps to harden our infrastructure, and in particular, in this particular case, we were moving towards transient token-based authentication for Cosmos DB, which is a best practice for authenticating to anything really, but especially to Cosmos DB.
Cool, that's a great starting point as the why we were making this kind of change here. Mark, I'll turn to you. The post-incident review talked about the incident being triggered by ARM or your team, your service, making a change on a specific database. And this is a Cosmos DB database. So I wondered if you could help us to understand the lay of the land here. What does ARM use Cosmos DB for? And doesn't the kind of global replication within Cosmos mean that any changes we make will inherently impact all regions? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Good question. So ARM uses Cosmos DB for storing a lot of the backend state of ARM. So when a call comes into Azure Resource Manager, it can hit any of the endpoints of our service in any of the regions in the cloud. And no matter where you are, we need to be able to look up what the state of your subscription is, where your resource groups are, where your resources are, so we can route the call to the appropriate resource provider. In this case, we were routing calls. We were looking up Azure Feature Exposure Control State to understand kind of what feature flags a subscription is opted into or not, to see how to process the calls. So that was the database that was incorrectly configured to block the shared key authentication. That Cosmos DB is replicated globally, which is a critical thing for ARM because our state is global. So if a call, no matter where a call comes in, we have to be able to look up the state for your particular subscription. And so we heavily rely on that global distributed nature of Cosmos DB for managing our backend state.
You touched on some really interesting points there, Mark. And one of the things in the PIR you mentioned as well, you differentiate between Cosmos accounts used for the RP or the resource provider, and then for core ARM processing. Can you help us understand what's the difference here, and why do you even need different authentication methods at all?
Great, it's a good question. That Azure is built on Azure, and so part of that includes that Microsoft Entra, the authentication service itself, runs on top of Azure and Azure Resource Manager. And so a best practice in any service engineering is to not have circular dependencies. And so the core ARM service accounts use a lower level data center key management service for managing authentication keys, so that we don't have a circular dependency where ARM depends on Entra and Entra depends on ARM.
Yeah, and a great way of understanding this is you can imagine if we're creating a new cloud, for example, as we stand up that new cloud, if to create ARM, we need Entra for authentication, but in order to create Entra, we need ARM to run Entra. It's very difficult to create a new cloud. And so we need at the lower levels to have a low-level authentication service that we can use to bootstrap everything that's necessary to then run the Entra service that everyone else depends on.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense why we would want to avoid a circular dependency like that. That's great. So, Brendan, we'll stick with you here. Could you talk us through what is the Azure feature exposure control state that we talked about in the post-incident review, and how did that ultimately end up being miscategorized into the wrong account and getting that wrong configuration?
Sure. So features are used by Azure Resource Manager to expose capabilities to different subscriptions. We have various things in previews at various times, or regions that are limited access, types of hardware that have limited access. And we use features in ARM to decide effectively whether a subscription has access to a particular part of a service or not. And so practically every request that goes through ARM, or at least practically every subscription that goes through ARM, has some sort of feature associated with it from some sort of preview or other capability. So whenever we handle a request, we need to be able to look up what features are attached to that subscription, and then use that information to route the request to the right provider with the right capabilities.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. So Mark, I wanted to get into the specifics of the incident here because you were on call for this, as was I. I remember us working together on this incident. So would you help us to summarize kind of how we initially detected the issue here, how we investigated what went wrong, and particularly why the comms team was engaged late? I showed up late to the party here, and some of our customer comms were delayed as a result. Could you talk us through managing the incident?
Sure. The ARM's internal monitors detected the drop in success rate almost immediately. That our DRIs then were kind of investigating within a few minutes of what was going on. It was that a little bit of fog of war of trying to understand, hey, exactly what was going on and how significant the impact was. That once the engineers realized that most calls in the, or almost all calls in the cloud were failing, that's the point that declared an outage, and got the you and the communications team involved for letting our customers know what was going on.
Yeah. And in particular, I think we've talked a lot about our automated notification system that we have available in the public cloud. And unfortunately, those automated notifications are not currently present in the Fairfax, in the government cloud.
It's interesting that you touch on that, Brendan. What is the plan? What is the gap? What is the ideal state for kind of cloud parity across our different sovereign clouds and our public cloud?
Sure. I mean, I think anybody who runs a cloud service, even between different regions, knows that any sort of differences are oftentimes the causes of outages and the causes of problems, because you have unexpected things that happen in a particular region because the configuration is wrong, or you expect that a certain monitor is going to fire in a public cloud, or in a sovereign cloud where it would in a public cloud. And so, I think the North Star for everyone is to ensure that we have exactly the same configurations, exactly the same alerts. I think in this particular case, there was a historic change that was true, that had been, there was parity across all of the sovereign clouds and the public cloud. We had a reorganization of some of the services within the ARM team. A change was made in the service mappings for the subscriptions in the public cloud, and unfortunately, the same change wasn't reflected into the sovereign clouds. And I think it's just a good illustration of whenever you're in these situations, you need to have automation that introspects and looks for anomalies between configurations of different environments, and fires an alert, because you can't trust that people are going to remember to do the right steps. And so subsequently, we did an audit of our other configurations and to look for similar patterns, and actually found and fixed another one. So it was a good opportunity to help improve parity.
Yeah, that parity is a great word for it as we try to that's a good desired state to head towards. The other one that we talk about a lot during these incident retrospectives is a lack of parity between pre-production and production. And of course, the same kind of thing applies here for sovereign clouds. Mark, absolutely. I wanted to come back to you. We talked about detection, we talked about investigation. Could you just round out the story here in terms of how we were able to mitigate the incident and if anything, slow down the recovery?
Sure. One of the challenges here was that the normal command line tooling for updating this configuration on a Cosmos DB account actually goes to ARM. And because ARM was down, we couldn't run that directly, so that we needed to bring in the engineers from the Cosmos DB team to update state on the back end. Also, because this was the US government cloud, that we need to do that through what we call an escort session through the operators to make sure that any changes to our government clouds are kind of following are executed by the operators, and that we're kind of maintaining proper compliance there.
And it was a good opportunity, I think, for us to have a little bit of a good discussion with the Cosmos DB team about perhaps having some of their tooling be available to ARM on call, so that if we hit this situation again, the ARM DRI would be able to have a limited ability for this particular kind of database that is critical to ARM, to make changes even if ARM is down, because it illustrated a smaller form of the kind of circular dependency that we were talking about before.
Yeah, that's a great point. We like to think that our outages always teach us something new about our platform that we didn't learn. And so for those conversations to come out of that is always good learnings here. Mark, I wanted to cover off some of the repair items from the post-incident review. We mentioned moving this to an isolated subscription and applying some management locks. Can you talk us through why those are important and give us a progress update? I think those are going to be completed later this month.
Yeah, that's sure. That one of the kind of triggers for this was the fact that this particular Cosmos DB account, due to some of the history of it, was misclassified as being owned by the wrong subsystem. And so one of the first things that we did was kind of make sure that, hey, we're properly classifying this as part of the core ARM platform so that it's not kind of getting operated on in the wrong way. It's also, we're going to go through and use Azure Resource Manager locks to put a write lock on this account, and just to add an extra kind of speed bump for anybody who might accidentally change it, to make sure that, hey, don't go change this without that you won't be able to change it without removing the lock, which kind of makes it clear that, hey, this is kind of a critical resource that we need, that should not be blindly modified.
That's cool. I like the idea of like 2 keys just to make sure. Yeah. Brendan, one of the things that I found interesting is that when ARM is making changes to a Cosmos account, Cosmos has said, hey, we're going to stagger those changes slowly. So we're not going to flip the bit across all regions at the same time, but we're going to kind of stage it a little bit slowly once a change is made. Is there a trade-off there? Surely you want some changes to be like all at once, or is it great to have them kind of bit by bit? Is there any sort of trade-off, or can you help me understand that a little bit better?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's always, this is actually a kind of trade-off that ARM is very familiar with. Anytime you move from a regional resource, a virtual machine is very clearly in a specific region, to more of a global concept like access control or, policy, or a lot of the things that ARM deals with. You have this trade-off of when you want to take an action and have it go globally immediately, right? You may know, for example, that a particular account has been exploited, the password is known, it's being abused. When you make that access control change, you want that to happen everywhere at the same time. And in fact, if we took 24 hours or a safe deployment long to implement an access control change for an exploited account, our customers would be up in arms, right? But alternatively, in a situation like this, where it was not an exploited account, where we were making a proactive change to improve security, improve our posture, but that might have some reliability implications, you want to do it slowly so that we would have impact. If this configuration change rolled out regionally, this authentication change rolled out regionally, we would have only impacted a single region of ARM. We wouldn't have impacted the government cloud globally. And so there's a balance that needs to be struck there. And I think ultimately the right answer is to just provide the right capabilities to the end user making the change, so that they're the ones who know, is this something I want to do immediately, a force, versus a gradual and safe, and allow them to make those trade-offs. In some sense, it's the same as like, when do I want to delete this file and have it ask me yes or no, or do I want to just delete it for sure, right? If I'm deleting 1,000 files, answering yes or no every time is pretty painful. But for one, it might save me. So there's that kind of trade-off.
I find those trade-offs necessary, interesting, fascinating, never a silver bullet. It's always difficult to kind of ride that line. I'd like to say my last question, David, you mentioned that you were on call with Mark. You were the on-call communications person communicating to our customers. How did communications go? How did we do?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, as I mentioned, we got to the party late. There was about an hour of time in between where customer impact started and when our team was engaged to go and help to communicate that with customers. As Mark explained, that was in part the fog of war and trying to figure out exactly what was down so that we knew what to communicate in the first place. But once our communications team was engaged, we sent communications out to every customer that was using the Azure US Government cloud within about 20 minutes once we understood, not just what was broken, but also what we were doing about it. And so even though the comms were delayed by that, I was really happy that we were able to be transparent in the communications. We were able to explain our working theory of what was going wrong and what we were doing about it in terms of rolling back that or making that new configuration change to undo it here. We got those communications out within about 20 minutes, and then within another 10 minutes, we also decided to go and use our public status page, which that status, I'm going to give the wrong URL. It's no longer status.azure.com. We moved it, azure.status.microsoft. We used that page only really in a few specific scenarios here. In this case, it was multi-region and it was multi-service. It was multi-region because it impacted the whole Azure US Government cloud, and it was multi-service because ARM is obviously so critical to so many different Azure services that depend on it. And so even though we hadn't seen a huge amount of pickup, there wasn't a lot of cases from customers, we thought just in abundance of caution that we should use that public status page as well. By the time we did that, within actually 10 minutes, we were mitigated, and it took us a few minutes just to double check that everything was mitigated and that error rates had returned back to their normal levels, and then we were able to go and send comms to tell customers that it's fixed and pull that message down from the status page. So altogether, I think transparent comms, there's still some room for improvement about it, engaging the comms team early, and with time, we'd love to have the same kind of automated comms engagement in public cloud as we do in some of our sovereign clouds. Thank you for watching this Azure Incident Retrospective.
At the scale of which our cloud operates at, incidents are inevitable.
Just as Microsoft is always learning and improving, we hope our customers and partners can learn from these too, and provide a lot of reliability guidance through the Azure well-architected framework.
To ensure that you get posted incident reviews after an outage and invites to join these live stream Q&A sessions, please ensure that you have Azure Service Health Alerts set up.
We're really focused on being as transparent as possible and showing up and being accountable after these major incidents.
Whether it's an outage, a security, or a privacy event, Microsoft is investing heavily in these events to ensure that we earn, maintain, and at times rebuild your trust. Thanks for joining us.